No matter what you do, there's a quiet thought that stays. Someone else could do this better. Someone else could take your place. At work, in friendships, even in relationships, you show up, you try, you contribute, and still you feel replaceable. So the question sits underneath everything. Why does your presence feel so temporary? 2. Problem deep dive. It doesn't always feel intense. Sometimes it's just a subtle awareness. You're in a group conversation and someone else speaks more confidently. You notice it. At work, someone performs better, learns faster, gets more recognition. You compare without meaning to. In relationships, it's quieter. You wonder if someone else could make them happier, be easier, be more interesting. And once that thought appears, it doesn't fully leave. So you adjust. You try to be more useful, more likable, more valuable. But the feeling doesn't go away, because no matter how much you do, it still feels like it might not be enough. This creates a kind of tension. You're always slightly performing, not dramatically, just enough to maintain your place. And that's exhausting, because your value never feels stable. It feels conditional, like it depends on what you provide, not who you are. So the deeper question becomes, why does your mind keep measuring your place as if it could disappear at any moment? 3. Reframe. This isn't about your actual value. It's about how your brain tracks value. You're not objectively replaceable in the way you think, but your mind isn't measuring uniqueness, it's measuring stability. And right now, that stability feels external, based on roles, performance, how others respond to you. So your brain keeps scanning. Am I still needed here? Am I still enough? This isn't insecurity in the usual sense, it's a lack of internal anchoring. Your sense of worth is tied to moving variables, and moving variables never feel secure. So even when nothing is wrong, your brain keeps checking because it hasn't found something that feels stable enough to stop. But what exactly is missing? 5. Psychological mechanism. To understand this, you need to look at how the brain forms identity. Your sense of self comes from two sources: internal identity and external feedback. Internal identity is stable. It's based on values, traits, and self-perception. External feedback is dynamic. It changes depending on context, people, and performance. Now here's where the imbalance happens. If your internal identity isn't strongly defined, your brain relies more on external signals. This is linked to something called contingent self-worth. Your value becomes dependent on outcomes, approval, recognition, usefulness. So your brain constantly monitors, am I still contributing enough? Am I still needed? This involves the default mode network, which processes self-related thoughts, and the anterior cingulate cortex, which detects social and emotional uncertainty. When your place feels unclear, these systems stay active, looping, comparing, evaluating. Here's the mental model. Imagine your identity as a structure. If it's built on solid ground, it stays stable. But if it's built on moving platforms, like other people's reactions, it constantly shifts. So no matter how much you add, it never feels secure, because the foundation isn't fixed. That's why you feel replaceable. Not because you lack value, but because your brain is tracking value through unstable signals. But this pattern can change, not by becoming better, but by changing what your mind uses to measure your place. 5. Practical framework. You don't solve this by proving your worth externally. You shift how your brain defines it internally. 1. Identify what your value is currently tied to. Right now, your brain is using certain signals to measure your place. What to do? Ask yourself, what makes me feel valuable? Be honest. Is it being useful? Being liked? Being needed? Why it works? This brings unconscious value systems into conscious awareness. Once visible, they can be adjusted. Real-life example: you realize you feel valuable only when you're helping others. That explains why you feel replaceable when you're not needed. 2. Separate presence from performance. Your brain is merging who you are with what you do. What to do? Remind yourself, my presence is not the same as my output. Why it works? This reduces contingent self-worth and stabilizes identity processing. Your brain stops equating value with constant contribution. Real-life example: in a group setting, you're quieter than usual. Instead of thinking, I'm not adding enough, you recognize you don't have to perform to belong. 3. Build internal reference points. Right now, your brain looks outward to define your place. It needs something internal to anchor to. What to do? Define a few consistent traits or values that don't change based on context. Why it works? This strengthens internal identity networks and reduces reliance on external validation. Real-life example: you identify yourself as thoughtful, curious, or consistent. These don't depend on others' reactions. They stay. 4. Reduce constant comparison loops. Comparison reinforces the idea that value is relative. What to do? Notice when you're comparing and gently redirect attention. Why it works? This interrupts default mode network loops that amplify self-evaluation. It reduces perceived threat. Real-life example: you notice someone performing better. Instead of analyzing the difference, you return to your own task. The loop breaks. 5. Allow yourself moments where you are not useful. This feels uncomfortable because your brain equates usefulness with security. What to do? Let yourself exist in spaces without contributing. No fixing, no helping, no proving. Why it works? This retrains the brain to tolerate non-performance without triggering threat signals. Real-life example: you're with others and you don't try to add value. You just observe. At first, it feels unnatural, but over time, the discomfort decreases. 6. Integration. At its core, this isn't about being replaceable. It's about how your brain defines stability. Right now, stability comes from outside, from roles, from reactions, from how needed you feel. But those things change, so your sense of value keeps shifting with them. And that creates the feeling that your place isn't secure. But when you shift the foundation inward, something changes. Your presence starts to feel less conditional, less dependent, more stable. Not because the world changed, but because what you're measuring is different. 7. Quiet, empowering close. You were never meant to earn your place over and over again, not in every conversation, not in every moment. Because if your value depends on constant proof, it will never feel settled. But if it begins to come from something internal, something quieter, something that doesn't shift every time the environment does, then the feeling starts to change. Not all at once, but gradually, until one day you stop asking if you're replaceable and start noticing something else. You're not here to compete for space. You're already in it. And maybe that's what your mind has been trying to understand all along.